I always believed photographs remembered what people forgot. That was something my husband, Thomas, used to tease me about whenever he caught me dusting another frame on the living room shelf. He would smile, wrap an arm around my shoulders, and say, "Maggie, one day these pictures will tell our grandchildren who we really were." For 48 years, I believed him. That was why, on a quiet Tuesday morning in early October, I decided to prepare our family albums for what would have been our 50th wedding anniversary celebration. Thomas had been gone for almost 3 years, but I still planned to invite everyone over for dinner. I wanted Emma to hear the stories behind the old photographs before those memories faded with me. I carried 3 heavy albums from the hallway closet to the dining room table, made myself a cup of coffee, and opened the oldest one. The first few pages were exactly as I remembered. Our wedding. Our first apartment. The tiny blue house we bought after David was born. I smiled at every picture because each one carried a memory that no camera could fully capture. Then I reached a photograph from a 4th of July picnic nearly 30 years ago. I remembered that day perfectly because David had won a pie eating contest and refused to wash the blueberry filling off his face until bedtime. I looked at the handwritten caption beneath the photograph and frowned. It read, "Thomas, David, Grandma Rose, 4th of July, 1994. I blinked and looked again. My name was missing. I laughed softly to myself. Someone must have forgotten to write it years ago. It seemed like such a harmless mistake that I almost turned the page without another thought. Instead, curiosity made me keep looking. The next photograph showed Thomas teaching David how to fish at a small lake outside Flagstaff. The caption listed both of their names. Mine was missing again, even though I clearly remembered standing beside them moments before taking that picture. Then came David's high school graduation. Thomas, David, Aunt Carol, Uncle Frank. Still no Margaret. I stopped smiling. The coffee beside me had already grown cold, but I did not notice. One by one, I turned every page. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family reunions, vacations to California, Thanksgiving dinners. Sometimes I was standing in the background. Sometimes I was sitting at the center of the table. Sometimes I was holding a birthday cake or hugging David after one of his baseball games. Yet every handwritten caption carefully named everyone except me. It was too consistent to be an accident. I closed the album and rubbed my hands together, trying to convince myself that grief was making me overthink something insignificant. Thomas had organized many of these albums himself. He would never have erased my name. Never. I stood, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled down a newer album that Linda had given me 5 Christmases earlier after she had volunteered to digitize our family memories. The cover still looked brand new. As I opened it, I expected to prove myself wrong. Instead, my heartbeat slowed. Every caption had been professionally printed instead of handwritten. Every date was correct. Every location was correct. Every family member was identified with perfect accuracy. Except me. It was as though I had been present in every photograph, but had never deserved to be introduced. Then I reached the final page and found something even stranger. A recent family portrait filled the page, but the place where my name should have appeared beneath my smiling face was completely blank. I sat perfectly still, staring at the empty space beneath my own face. It was not a smudge. It was not faded ink. It was a clean, deliberate blank, almost as if someone had typed every other name and intentionally skipped mine before sending the page to print. I ran my finger across the glossy paper, expecting to feel a scratch or a peeled label, but the surface was smooth. Whoever had made this album wanted it to look natural. I closed it slowly and carried both albums into my home office. The room had barely changed since Thomas passed away. His favorite leather chair still sat beside the window, and his old oak desk remained exactly where he had left it. I placed the albums side by side and began comparing them page by page. The older album contained handwritten captions. The newer one had polished layouts, matching fonts, and professionally restored photographs. Linda had proudly presented it to everyone during Christmas dinner 5 years earlier. I remembered her saying she wanted to preserve the family legacy for future generations. At the time, I had hugged her and thanked her for spending so many hours scanning old pictures. Now I wondered what she had really spent those hours doing. My eyes moved from one page to another. Every correction seemed small when viewed alone. A missing name here. A cropped edge there. A caption rewritten in slightly different language. But together they formed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. I reached for another box stored beneath the bookshelf, one filled with loose photographs that had never made it into an album. They smelled faintly of old paper and cedar. I found the original print of the same family portrait from the last page. On the back, written in Thomas's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, Margaret, Thomas, David, Linda, Emma. Thanksgiving, 2019. My name was the very first one he had written. I felt a strange mix of relief and uneasiness. Thomas had not forgotten me. Someone else had removed me afterward. I glanced at the clock. It was almost 4 in the afternoon. Without thinking too much, I called David. He answered after several rings. Hi, Mom. Everything okay? His voice sounded pleasant enough, but distracted. I have a question about the family albums Linda made, I said. There was a pause that lasted just a little too long. What about them? Did you ever notice that my name is missing from the captions? Silence. Then a short laugh. Mom, it is probably just a printing mistake. You know how those online photo companies are. Every single time. I asked gently. Another pause. I have to jump into a meeting, he replied quickly. I will ask Linda about it later. Before I could answer, he ended the call. I lowered the phone and stared out the office window. David had always hated confrontation, but something about that conversation felt rehearsed. He had not sounded surprised. He had sounded prepared. Just then my tablet chimed with a notification. Emma had shared a new family photo album online after a cousin's birthday party the previous weekend. Curious, I opened it. The first image appeared on the screen. Everyone was tagged by name with neat little labels floating above their heads. David, Linda, Emma, Cousin Rachel, Uncle Frank. I enlarged the picture until my own smiling face filled the screen. There was no tag above me at all, as though the software no longer recognized that I belonged to my own family. I stared at the screen for nearly a minute before closing the photo album without leaving a comment. My reflection looked back at me from the dark display, and for the first time in years I questioned whether I had been missing far longer than I realized. I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Facial recognition software made mistakes. Online albums could lose information. But software did not erase printed captions. Software did not leave one name blank over and over again. The next morning, I drove to Emma's apartment near the university campus. She had classes that afternoon, but she invited me inside with the same warm smile she had always given me. Her tiny living room was cluttered with textbooks, camera equipment, and 2 computer monitors covered with editing windows. Grandma, you sounded worried on the phone, she said as she handed me a mug of tea. I placed the newer family album on her coffee table and quietly opened it to the Thanksgiving portrait. Tell me honestly, have you ever noticed this? Emma leaned forward. Her smile disappeared almost instantly. Your name, she whispered. It is not here. It never is. She flipped through page after page, growing quieter with each turn. I have seen these pictures before, she said. I never paid attention to the captions. I watched her expression change from confusion to concern. Can you look at the digital files? I asked. Maybe they still have the original information. Emma nodded and opened her laptop. She logged into the family's shared cloud account, the one Linda had proudly created years ago so everyone could access old memories. Hundreds of folders appeared, neatly organized by holidays, birthdays, anniversaries, and vacations. Emma clicked through them quickly. Every image looked familiar. Every caption looked polished. Every name appeared exactly where it should have been except mine. That is strange, she murmured. Really strange. She downloaded one of the photographs onto her desktop and opened a program I had never seen before. Colored graphs, file properties, and tiny blocks of information filled the screen. What are you looking for? I asked. Metadata, she replied. Pictures remember more than people think. Cameras, editing programs, dates. They all leave fingerprints. She clicked through several menus before stopping suddenly. Her eyes narrowed. This photograph was modified. Recently? I asked. No. She shook her head. About 4 years ago. She opened another file. Then another. Every single one showed signs of editing during the same 3-month period. That cannot be a coincidence, Emma whispered. Somebody went through these albums one by one. My heart sank. Can you tell who did it? She frowned and kept searching. Not from these copies. Whoever uploaded them removed most of the editing history. She hesitated before opening another hidden menu buried deep inside the software. Wait. She leaned closer to the screen. There is one field they forgot to erase. I stood beside her chair, barely breathing. A single line appeared at the bottom of the window. It listed the name of the computer that had created the edited files. Emma looked at me, her face suddenly pale. "Grandma," she said quietly. "This computer was registered under Dad's home office, not Mom's." I looked back at the screen, hoping I had misunderstood what Emma had just said. "Are you sure?" I asked. She nodded slowly but did not take her eyes off the monitor. The editing software records the device name unless someone deliberately removes it. Whoever cleaned these files erased almost everything, but they missed this field. The computer was registered as David Sullivan Home Office. I felt my stomach tighten. "That does not necessarily mean your father edited them himself." Emma agreed immediately. "No, it does not. Anyone using that computer could have done it. Your dad, Mom, even someone they trusted." She clicked through several more files, searching for anything that might tell us more, but every photograph pointed back to the same machine. The pattern was impossible to ignore. I leaned back in my chair and stared across Emma's apartment. Framed photographs lined one wall. Most of them had been taken by Emma herself. She noticed where I was looking and smiled sadly. "Grandma, none of mine are edited." She picked up a frame from her bookshelf and handed it to me. It showed the three of us at her high school graduation. She had one arm around David and the other around me. On the back, she had written in black marker, "The two people who taught me what loyalty looks like." I felt tears gather in my eyes, but I blinked them away before they could fall. "Thank you," I whispered. She squeezed my hand. "I want to help you figure this out." On my drive home, I kept replaying every family gathering from the past 5 years. Linda had always insisted on organizing the photo albums. She volunteered to manage the online storage. She even offered to scan every old print after Thomas passed away because she said she wanted to preserve our family's history. At the time, I had thought she was doing something thoughtful. Now, every generous gesture looked different. Still, one question refused to leave my mind. Why? Removing my name from photographs could not possibly benefit anyone by itself. There had to be a larger reason. That evening, I walked into my home office and opened the cedar chest where Thomas kept documents he considered too important for the filing cabinet. Most of the contents were exactly as I remembered. Old letters, military records belonging to his father, insurance papers. Then I found a large envelope labeled in his handwriting. "Family Archive. Do not discard." Inside were dozens of undeveloped rolls of film, printed contact sheets, and several notebooks. I smiled because Thomas had always believed that digital files could disappear, but negatives would outlive all of us if they were stored properly. As I turned another page in one of his notebooks, I noticed a list of names besides several photo sessions. Every person in every picture had been carefully identified, including me. Thomas had documented everything with remarkable detail. Near the back of the notebook, a folded receipt slipped onto the floor. It was from a professional photo restoration company dated just 4 months after his funeral. I unfolded it carefully. The invoice listed more than 600 photographs that had been scanned, restored, and digitally processed. Under the customer information was a familiar signature. It was not Linda's. It was David's. I read David's signature 3 times before I accepted that it was real. The receipt was not a copy. It was the original invoice, folded neatly inside Thomas's envelope as though he had intended someone to find it one day. The date caught my attention even more than the signature. It had been issued just 4 months after Thomas's funeral, during a period when I could barely remember what day of the week it was. I had been grieving, struggling to adjust to an empty house, trusting my son to help with the details I was too exhausted to handle. I sat down at Thomas's desk and spread everything across the surface. The notebook, the receipt, the old contact sheets, the undeveloped film. Thomas had always believed that every important story deserved a paper trail. Looking at the evidence in front of me, I realized he had unknowingly left me one. The next morning, I called the photo restoration company listed on the receipt. I expected to reach a recording, but a pleasant woman answered after only 2 rings. I introduced myself and explained that I was reviewing family records after my husband's passing. "I know this is a long shot," I said carefully, "but I found an old receipt for a restoration project. I was wondering if you keep any records." She asked for the invoice number. I read it aloud while my heart pounded against my ribs. After a brief silence filled with keyboard clicks, she returned. "Yes, We still have the project in our archive. I gripped the phone tighter. Can you tell me who requested the work? The order was placed by David Sullivan, she replied. That much I already knew. Did he request anything unusual? There was another pause. I am sorry, ma'am. I cannot discuss customer instructions over the phone. I thanked her anyway and ended the call. At least one fact was no longer a mystery. David had personally delivered the photographs. That evening, Emma stopped by after class. I showed her the receipt and told her about the phone call. She studied the document for a long moment before looking at me. Grandma, if the company still has the project, they might still have backup files. Would they really keep something that old? I asked. Professional studios often archive original scans for years, she explained. Sometimes they keep every version in case customers want additional prints. Hope flickered for the first time in days. If the original file still existed, they might reveal exactly what had been changed and when. Before we could discuss it further, my landline rang. Hardly anyone used that number anymore. I answered without checking the caller identification. Margaret. The familiar voice belonged to Harold Bennett, Thomas's oldest friend. We had not spoken in several months. I was cleaning my attic today, he said, and I found several boxes Thomas asked me to hold on to years ago. I completely forgot about them until now. My pulse quickened. What kind of boxes? Mostly slides, negatives, and a few binders, Harold replied. He told me they were part of the family archive and that if anything ever seemed wrong, I should make sure you received them. I closed my eyes. Thomas had never spoken carelessly. If he had left instructions like that, he must have believed those boxes would matter someday. Harold continued, his voice suddenly more serious. Margaret, there is something else you should know. One of the binders has a note attached to it in Thomas's handwriting. It says, "Open this only if our family's history is ever changed." I barely slept that night. Thomas had never been the kind of man to leave dramatic messages or mysterious instructions. If he wrote something down, it was because he believed it might one day become important. By sunrise, I had already brewed a pot of coffee, fed the birds outside the kitchen window, and found myself checking the clock every few minutes. Harold said he would arrive at 10. At exactly 9:58, his old pickup truck pulled into my driveway. That was Harold, reliable to the minute. He climbed out carefully, carrying 2 weathered cardboard boxes and a thick black binder wrapped in a faded blue cloth. The moment I saw Thomas's handwriting on the label, my chest tightened. Harold set everything on my dining room table and removed his cap. I should have brought these over years ago, he said quietly. But Thomas was very specific. He told me to keep them unless something ever made you question your own place in the family. I looked at him in surprise. He actually said that? Harold nodded. He told me people do strange things after grief. He hoped he was being overly cautious. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, I untied the cloth around the binder. On the front page, Thomas had written a single sentence in blue ink. If you are reading this, someone has tried to rewrite our family story. My hands trembled as I turned the page. Instead of a letter, I found a detailed index. Every family event was listed by year, cross-referenced with photographs, negatives, receipts, and handwritten notes. It looked less like a scrapbook and more like the archive of a historian. He organized everything, Harold said with a faint smile. You know how he was. I smiled back despite everything. Better than anyone. We spent the next hour opening boxes. Inside were hundreds of color slides, old negatives stored in protective sleeves, and envelopes marked with dates stretching back nearly 40 years. Thomas had even included notes describing who took each picture and who appeared in the frame. Nothing had been left to memory alone. Harold picked up one envelope and frowned. This one is different. He handed it to me. Across the seal Thomas had written, "Original prints. Never replace." I carefully opened it and found pristine photographs that matched many of the altered images Emma and I had already examined. Every original caption included my name exactly where it belonged. My relief lasted only a moment before another thought replaced it. If these originals still existed, why had someone gone through so much effort to create different versions? Harold leaned back in his chair. Margaret, I have known David since he was a little boy. I cannot imagine him doing this for no reason. Neither can I admitted. That is what frightens me the most. Just then my phone buzzed. It was a message from Emma. Grandma, I think somebody knows we have been looking into the photo files. I called her immediately. She answered on the first ring, sounding more unsettled than I had ever heard her. I logged into the family cloud account this morning, she said. Almost every album we looked at yesterday is gone. My heart skipped. Gone. Deleted overnight, she replied. And there is something even stranger. Right before the albums disappeared, a brand new folder was created. It has only one file inside. The folder is named Family Legacy, and it is locked with a password. For the next several seconds, neither Emma nor I said a word. I could hear her breathing through the phone while I stared at the open binder Thomas had left behind. Harold watched my expression without interrupting. Finally, I asked, "Can you open the file?" "No," Emma replied. "The folder is encrypted. Whoever created it changed the administrator settings for the entire family archive. Even my account only has read-only access now." That made no sense. Linda had always managed the family albums, but Emma had helped organize digital backups during college. Someone had deliberately removed her ability to see what was happening. "Can you tell when the folder was created?" I asked. I heard her typing rapidly. "Late last night. Around 11:43. Only a few hours after you," and I looked through the metadata. My stomach tightened. The timing could not be ignored. Someone had realized we were asking questions and reacted almost immediately. After ending the call, I explained everything to Harold. He folded his arms and looked toward the window for a long moment. "Margaret," he said quietly, "people usually hide something because they are afraid of losing it. The question is, what are they protecting?" I wished I knew. Later that afternoon, Emma arrived carrying her laptop and an external hard drive. She spread everything across my dining room table beside Thomas's notebooks. The contrast was striking. His careful handwritten records sat next to modern digital equipment, both trying to preserve the same family history. Emma connected the drive and smiled faintly. "At least I prepared for one thing." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Last year I downloaded copies of several family albums for a photography project. I never deleted them." Hope returned for the first time since she called. She opened the backup and began comparing the files with Thomas's originals. At first everything matched. Dates, locations, birthdays, Christmas mornings, summer vacations. Then she stopped scrolling. "Grandma, look at this." She opened two versions of the same photograph side by side. The first showed Thomas and me standing in front of our first house, our arms around each other, laughing at something outside the frame. The second looked almost identical except I had been carefully removed. The empty space beside Thomas had been filled with a section of the front porch so naturally that I would never have noticed if the original had not been sitting beside it. My breath caught. This was no missing caption. Someone had erased my entire presence from the image. Emma checked another file. Then another. It happened again and again. Sometimes my name disappeared. Sometimes my face had been cropped away. Sometimes my entire body had been digitally removed. The edits had become more sophisticated over the years. "This was not one afternoon of editing," Emma whispered. "Somebody worked on this project for a very long time." Harold slowly turned another page in Thomas's binder. Attached to the margin was one of Thomas's handwritten notes. It read, "Always preserve the originals. History becomes dangerous when only one version survives." None of us spoke. We no longer needed to guess whether someone had changed the family archive. We were looking directly at the proof. Emma continued examining file properties until she suddenly leaned closer to the screen. "Grandma," she said, almost in disbelief. These edited copies were not all uploaded at the same time. They replaced the originals little by little over almost 4 years. Whoever did this wanted nobody to notice the changes. She clicked one final menu and froze. Hidden inside the backup was an export log listing every edited file and the destination where it had been sent. At the very top of the list was a project title that none of us had ever seen before. It simply read, "Sullivan Family Legacy Book, Final Edition." None of us spoke for several moments. The words Sullivan Family Legacy Book, Final Edition remained on Emma's screen like a quiet accusation. I looked from the monitor to Thomas's binder and back again. The two versions of our family's history could not have been more different. One had been built carefully over decades with handwritten notes, original negatives, and documented memories. The other had been assembled by slowly replacing those memories until a different story appeared to be true. "Can you open the project?" I asked. Emma clicked on the file path, but an error message appeared almost immediately. "The destination no longer exists," she said. "The export log survived, but the project itself was either moved or deleted." Harold leaned forward. Can you tell where it was supposed to go? Emma studied the screen for another minute. Only that it was prepared for professional printing. Whoever made this was not organizing family photos for fun. They were creating something that was meant to be published. A strange memory surfaced in my mind. About 6 months earlier, Linda had mentioned wanting to create a beautiful keepsake book for future generations. I remembered complimenting the idea and even offering to help identify people in the older photographs. She had smiled politely before saying she already had everything she needed. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now that conversation felt entirely different. Emma continued searching through the backup drive until she found a folder labeled draft layouts. Most of the files were damaged, but one small preview image remained. She enlarged it on the screen. It showed the cover of a hardcover book with gold lettering across a deep blue background. Beneath the title was a subtitle that made my heart sink. Celebrating 3 generations of the Sullivan family. There was a large family portrait on the cover. Thomas stood proudly in the center. David, Linda, and Emma smiled beside him. My place was empty. Not cropped. Not hidden behind another person. Completely removed, as though I had never stood there at all. Harold slowly shook his head. That photograph was taken in your backyard, he said quietly. I remember because Thomas asked me to take it. I nodded. I was standing beside him. You were, Harold replied. I remember adjusting the camera because the afternoon sun kept shining in your eyes. His certainty mattered more than he probably realized. It confirmed that these were not faulty memories shaped by grief. They were facts. Emma suddenly sat up straighter. Grandma, I think I know why they changed everything little by little. She opened another spreadsheet hidden inside the backup. It contained page numbers, chapter titles, and editing notes. Beside dozens of photographs were comments such as replace with final version, remove duplicate subject, and simplify family narrative. Simplify family narrative, I repeated softly. Emma looked at me with troubled eyes. That sounds like somebody was trying to make the story cleaner. Easier to tell. Harold frowned. Cleaner for whom? Nobody answered because none of us knew. Late that evening, after Harold had gone home, Emma packed up her laptop. Before leaving, she hesitated at the front door. Grandma, there is one thing I have not told you yet. My stomach tightened again. What is it? She looked down at her phone before meeting my eyes. I searched online for the title of that family book, just in case. There are no public listings. But I did find an announcement from the local historical society. They are hosting a community heritage exhibition next Saturday, and one of the featured presentations is called the Sullivan Family Legacy Collection. According to the program, the presenter is David Sullivan. I read the announcement twice before handing the phone back to Emma. The words looked harmless enough. Community Heritage Exhibition. Local families who helped shape our town. Featured presentation, the Sullivan Family Legacy Collection. Presenter, David Sullivan. Anyone else would have seen a pleasant weekend event celebrating local history. I saw something entirely different. If the book Emma had uncovered was the same one scheduled for that exhibition, then the rewritten photographs were about to become part of the public record. Once they were displayed, copied, and archived, the altered version of our family would begin replacing the truth. We cannot let that happen, I said quietly. Emma nodded without hesitation. Then we need evidence that nobody can dismiss. After she left, I returned to Thomas's binder. I was no longer searching for clues. I was searching for proof that would stand on its own. Thomas had documented everything with remarkable precision. Every photograph was linked to a negative. Every negative was matched with a date. Every important family event included receipts, handwritten notes, and even the names of people who had been present. It was impossible not to admire the care he had taken. At the time, I used to tease him for keeping so many records. Now those habits felt like a final act of love. The following morning, Harold returned carrying an old metal projector and several boxes of color slides. I figured these might help, he said with a grin. We spent hours projecting image after image onto the white wall of my living room. Every slide showed exactly what Thomas had recorded decades earlier. There I was holding David as a toddler, standing beside Thomas at church picnics, decorating Christmas trees, cheering from the bleachers during baseball games. Every memory existed exactly as I remembered it. Harold quietly pointed toward one slide. Pause there. Emma leaned closer. The image showed our family standing in front of the house after David graduated from college. On the edge of the frame stood another person holding a camera. Harold smiled. That is the photographer from the local newspaper. They covered the scholarship ceremony. Emma's eyes widened. If the newspaper covered it, they might still have their original photographs. Before lunch, she called the newspaper's archive department. After explaining that she was researching local family history, she asked whether they still maintained image negatives from older community events. The archivist surprised us by saying yes. Many of them had been digitized only a few years earlier. Emma searched the online catalog while the archivist remained on the phone. Less than a minute later, she gasped, "Grandma, they have it." The graduation photographs had been preserved exactly as they were originally taken. Every member of our family appeared exactly where they belonged. My name was included in the caption printed beneath the image. The archivist even offered to prepare certified copies for historical verification if we needed them. After ending the call, Emma looked relieved for the first time in days. "Now we have an independent source," she said. "Not family records. Not private albums. Public archives." It felt like the first solid ground beneath my feet since this strange journey had begun. That afternoon, I began organizing everything into separate folders. Thomas's originals, Harold's slides, newspaper archives, Emma's recovered digital files. Piece by piece, the real story was becoming impossible to erase. As I placed the final photograph into a folder, a folded envelope slipped from the back cover of Thomas's binder. Unlike the others, it had been sealed with clear tape. Across the front, in Thomas's careful handwriting, were 7 words that stopped me cold. "For David. Deliver only after my death." I held the envelope in both hands for a long time without opening it. Thomas had written those words with purpose. "For David. Deliver only after my death." I traced the familiar handwriting with my fingertips, remembering how carefully he chose every sentence he ever put on paper. Harold looked at me from across the dining room table. "Did you know about that?" he asked quietly. I slowly shook my head. "No. Thomas never mentioned it." Emma studied the envelope before speaking. "Grandma, if it says it was meant for Dad, maybe we should leave it sealed." She was right. Every instinct told me not to break the trust Thomas had placed in those instructions. I carefully placed the envelope inside a clear document sleeve and returned it to the binder. Whatever was inside belonged to David, at least for now. Instead, we focused on organizing the evidence we had already collected. Emma created 3 separate digital folders. The first contained Thomas's original scans, Harold's slides, and the certified newspaper archive images. The second contained the altered photographs from the family cloud account. The third contained comparison pages showing both versions side by side, making every missing name and every erased figure impossible to dismiss as coincidence. By evening, we had assembled a timeline stretching back nearly 4 years. The edits had begun only months after Thomas's funeral and continued gradually until almost every major family photograph had been replaced. The pattern revealed patience, planning, and consistency. This had never been an emotional decision made in a single afternoon. It had been a long project. The next morning, I received an unexpected phone call from the director of the local historical society. "Mrs. Sullivan," she said warmly, "I hope you do not mind my calling. Your son mentioned that your family has an extraordinary photographic archive. We are excited about this weekend's exhibition." I thanked her politely while listening carefully. "Has the exhibition already been finalized?" I asked. "Almost," she replied. "Your son delivered the display materials yesterday afternoon. They are absolutely beautiful. We especially love the restored family history book." My heart sank, but I kept my voice steady. "Would it be possible for me to attend the installation before the public opening?" She laughed softly. "Of course. Family members are always welcome. In fact, your son said he hoped you would be proud of the finished collection." After ending the call, I sat quietly for several minutes. Proud. That single word echoed through my mind. Proud of a history that no longer included me. Emma arrived shortly afterward, and I told her about the conversation. She looked genuinely puzzled. If they already delivered everything, then the exhibition is using the edited version. Harold folded his arms. "Then we should not surprise them before Saturday." Emma looked at him. "Why not?" He smiled gently. "Because people who believe their story cannot be challenged often reveal much more than people who know they are being watched." His words made perfect sense. We decided not to confront David or Linda. Not yet. We would attend the exhibition with the originals, the comparison files, and the independent newspaper records. If questions were asked, We would answer them with facts instead of accusations. Late that afternoon, I opened Thomas's binder one more time to prepare the documents we planned to bring. As I slid the envelope intended for David back into its sleeve, I noticed something I had somehow missed before. Tucked beneath it was a much smaller folded note. It contained only one handwritten sentence. If David never asks for the truth himself, Margaret, you must be the one to show it to him. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and the kind of cool autumn air Thomas always loved. I dressed more carefully than I had in months. Choosing the navy blue jacket he once said made me look confident even on difficult days. Emma picked me up just after 9, while Harold met us outside the Historical Society building carrying 2 archival boxes that contained Thomas's originals and the certified newspaper photographs. None of us spoke much during the drive. We all understood that today was not about winning an argument. It was about protecting the truth. Inside the exhibition hall, volunteers were making final adjustments before the public opening. Along one wall stood a beautifully arranged display titled the Sullivan Family Legacy Collection. Large restored photographs stretched across elegant panels. A professionally printed hardcover book rested beneath a spotlight inside a glass display case. Visitors who walked through that room would have believed they were looking at an accurate record of several generations. They would have been wrong. I slowly approached the first panel. There stood Thomas beside David during his first Little League season. The caption described Thomas as the father who had devoted his life to supporting his son's dreams. My name was nowhere to be found, even though I had sewn every uniform and driven David to every practice that summer. The next display showed our first home after years of saving. Thomas stood proudly in front of the porch alone. In the original photograph, I had been standing beside him with my arm around his waist. Here, I no longer existed. Emma quietly placed the original print next to the enlarged display without touching the exhibit itself. The difference was impossible to ignore. Harold simply shook his head. A few minutes later, David entered the hall wearing a suit and carrying a folder beneath his arm. He smiled politely until he saw us standing beside the exhibit. His expression changed instantly. "Mom," he said, forcing a calm voice. "I did not know you were coming this early." "The director said family was welcome," I answered gently. He looked toward the original photographs in Harold's hands before turning back to me. "Those old prints are incomplete. Linda restored everything from better copies." I looked directly into his eyes. "No, David. These are Thomas's originals. The negatives, the slides, the newspaper archives, and his handwritten records all agree with each other." He opened his mouth to respond, but stopped when Emma quietly placed the comparison binder on a nearby table. Side by side, every alteration became unmistakable. Missing names, cropped figures, entire photographs reconstructed to remove me from moments I had lived. David stared at the pages without speaking. At that moment, the Historical Society director walked over, smiling warmly until she noticed the comparison images. "Is something wrong?" she asked. I handed her Thomas's binder first, followed by the certified newspaper archive, and finally the comparison file Emma had prepared. I did not accuse anyone. I simply invited her to compare the evidence herself. The smile slowly disappeared from her face as she turned each page. "These images are different," she whispered. "Very different." More volunteers gathered around. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody argued. They simply looked from the exhibition panels to the originals and back again. The truth spoke more clearly than any speech I could have given. Finally, the director closed the binder and looked at David with quiet disappointment. "Before we open these doors to the public," she said, "I believe we need to understand why your family's history was changed." David lowered his head without answering. Then, after several long seconds, he slowly reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a sealed envelope. My heart nearly stopped. It was identical to the one Thomas had left inside the binder. Holding it carefully, David looked at me with eyes full of regret and said, "Mom, I think it is finally time for you to know what Dad asked me to hide." No one in the exhibition hall moved. The room had become so quiet that I could hear the old clock near the reception desk marking each passing second. David looked at the envelope in his hands before extending it toward me. "Dad gave this to me 2 weeks before he died," he said, his voice unsteady. "He told me not to open it until after the funeral. He said I would understand when the time came." I accepted the envelope carefully. The paper had yellowed slightly along the edges, but Thomas's handwriting was unmistakable. Unlike the first envelope, this one had already been opened years ago and sealed again with transparent tape. I looked at David. "Did you read it?" He nodded once. "The day after the funeral." "Then why did all of this happen?" I asked, gesturing toward the altered photographs surrounding us. David closed his eyes for a moment before answering. "Because I convinced myself I was protecting what Dad built, but I stopped protecting the people who built it with him." The Historical Society director quietly led the volunteers a few steps away, giving us privacy without leaving the room. Emma stood beside me, while Harold remained silent with his hands folded over Thomas's original binder. I unfolded the letter. Thomas's words were as calm and deliberate as they had always been. "My dear son, if you are reading this, your mother has already carried more than anyone will ever know. She never wanted recognition, but that does not mean she deserved to disappear. Families are not remembered because of the loudest voice. They are remembered because someone quietly held them together every single day. If grief ever tempts you to rewrite our story into something simpler, resist that temptation. The truth is sometimes complicated, but it is always kinder than a beautiful lie." I lowered the letter, unable to speak for several seconds. David finally continued. "After Dad died, I felt responsible for preserving the family legacy. Linda suggested creating a polished family history book. At first it was harmless. Then we started simplifying captions, removing duplicate names, cleaning up layouts. Every change seemed small. Every decision felt practical. Eventually, his voice broke. Eventually it became easier to erase your place than to admit we had already crossed the line." Linda, who had quietly entered the hall moments earlier, wiped tears from her eyes. She did not interrupt. She simply listened. "I never stopped knowing the truth," David said. "I just kept telling myself I would fix it before anyone noticed." Emma gently placed Thomas's original family photograph beside the exhibition display. The difference between the two versions no longer needed explanation. The director looked at the originals, then at the altered book inside the glass case. "This exhibition cannot open like this," she said softly. She instructed the staff to remove the display until accurate materials could be prepared. No one argued. Linda stepped forward slowly. "Margaret," she said, "I cannot ask you to forgive what we allowed to happen, but I will spend however long it takes restoring every photograph, every caption, and every record exactly as they were." I studied her face. For the first time since this began, I did not see someone defending a mistake. I saw someone finally accepting responsibility for it. I folded Thomas's letter and slipped it back into its envelope. "The photographs matter," I said quietly, "but they were never the real loss. The real loss was believing that the truth could be improved by leaving someone out." Several months later, a new exhibition opened in the same gallery. This time, every original photograph, every handwritten caption, and every documented memory appeared exactly as Thomas had preserved them. My name stood where it had always belonged, not because I demanded recognition, but because the truth finally had the chance to speak for itself. As Emma and I walked through the finished display, I looked at one familiar photograph of Thomas smiling beside me on our front porch. Beneath it, the caption simply read, "Thomas and Margaret Sullivan, building a life together." I smiled, touched the edge of the frame, and realized that memories can fade with time, but when enough people choose honesty over convenience, the truth always finds its way back home.